Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nazir, daf Kafav. It's the daf for Shabbat. Today's daf is sponsored by Katriella Friedman in memory of her father, Tzvi Stein, Tzvi ben Harav Mordechai David, on his third yahrzeit. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think of you, your warmth, your humor, your smile, and your optimism. Today's daf is sponsored by Kyle Robinson and Art Gold in memory of Art's father, Joseph, Yosef ben Shlomo Shabtai, Verachel, Zichrono Levracha. Today is his 24th yahrzeit. Joe was an ordinary man of extraordinary dignity, decency, and dedication. After World War II, he worked for the INS, welcoming immigrants to membership in America. I miss him and wish we had more time together. Okay, today we're going to get started with the bottom of Kaf He Amud Bet. Gemara says, Amal, quoting a statement that Rabbi Yochanan made previously, which is, halakha hi ben Nazir. This is a unique halakha by Nazir, if you remember. If the money was undesignated funds, then even though there's chatat money mixed in there, this is money you separate for your Nazir korban, you have chatat, ola, and shlamim mixed in, even though normally chatat that's left that no one can use anymore. We had our example of the woman whose husband nullified her vow, for example. It's a halakha Moshe Sinai. That means it's a tradition that the money all gets turned into olot nidava. We bring it for voluntary offerings. Okay, that's not what we do if it's mefulashim. If you already designated it, then remember, if you designate it for the chatat, it goes to yamamelach, the money. If the one you designate for the ola becomes a voluntary ola offering, the shlamim becomes a voluntary shlamim offering. So this is a unique halakha by Nazir that even though there's chatat money mixed in, we are allowed to use it for korbanot, for voluntary offerings, even though the chatat itself is not voluntary. But since none of the money was designated, this is a unique halakha. There's no really good explanation according to Rabbi Yochanan. V'tuleka. Now, sounds like Rabbi Yochanan is saying this is a very unique halakha to Nazir. It doesn't apply anywhere else. But wait, the Hatanya doesn't say in the braita. If you have other kinim that you're obligated to do, where you already designate the money, and let's say there's a lot of cases we talked about the other day where you become wealthy, and then instead of bringing a pair of birds, right, other than the zava, which anyway bring a pair of birds, but in the mitzorah, for example, instead of bringing a pair of birds, you can bring a pair of animals instead. So if you already set aside money without specifying what it was for, which one was the ola, which one was the chatat, you wanted to bring a different animal, you could turn that money into buying an animal for your sacrifice, either for the chatat of an animal chatat or an animal burnt offering. Mate, if he dies, vayula ma'ot stumin. Now this is what we were looking for. If the person dies and he had ma'ot stumin, because that wasn't talking about the chatat, notice. That was just talking about, right, but the point is, what does this show? Kinim that are unspecified, right now we get to it. If I set aside money for this pair of birds and then I die, and I hadn't specified which was going for which, yiplu l'nidava. This is talking about regular kinim, not just for the Nazir. So how do we explain this? To which they answer, Tana Nazir. It was talking about Nazir and other pairs, things that go together as a group. Okay, it could be mitzorah where there's 3 sacrifices that you bring. Anything that comes as a group, if you didn't designate the money, then it goes all to nidava. What's it coming to exclude then? When he said al-chai ben Nazir, and he meant Nazir and anything like Nazir. So they say, it came to exclude the following case. Here we're going to have an example where you have 2 obligations, but they're separate types of obligations. They're not a pair that comes together or a group of 3 that come together. I happen to have done something wrong. I'm obligated to sin offering. But then I also take upon myself to bring a korban ola. I say I want to bring a voluntary offering to the temple. Then what did I do next? I designated money. And then I said, this is for my obligation. Yeah, even though I said it, now here it's interesting. Hebrew is singular form, or it could be chovot. No, it would be chovotai. Anyway, you say it in the singular. This is for my obligation. But you want to bring this to cover your chatat, your animal? No. You want to bring it to cover your ola? You can't. Because we don't know what you're referring to, your chatat or your ola. And since they weren't grouped together to begin with, we can't use this same law. And that's what he said, halakha ben Nazir. It's true for Nazir and anything that's like Nazir, where things come as a package deal. When you talk about two separate things, it's not the same. So now the Gemara says, the braita continues here. Okay, mate, what if he dies? And he had this money that he set aside without designating what he was supposed to do with it. There's nothing he could do with it except send it to Yamamelach because the chatat money was mixed in there probably, or at least we assume, and therefore it has to go to Yamamelach, which is right. There's nothing we can do with it. It has to be left kind of to die, and that's sending it to Yamamelach. Amar Rav Ashi. Hada Amar meforashim lo. Rav Ashi says, okay, so the first part of today's daf was understanding this line that Rabbi Yochanan said, halakha ben Nazir. Was it only really Nazir? It seems like it was somewhere else. It's anything like Nazir, but not a case where there were two separate obligations. And he mentioned I'm going to bring this money for this sacrifice without being particular about which one. If it came from two different places, the obligation, then all these laws don't apply. Of stumim, meaning again, if you didn't specify, it goes to voluntary offerings. That wouldn't be true in the other case, in the case of two separate obligations. Now comes Rav Ashi, and he wants to define what is, I told you this a few days ago, we get to this, what is mifulash and what is satum? At what point does it leave being satum? Unspecified. So again, we would have thought until you say, this money is going to the ola, this money is going to the chatat, this money is going to the shlamim, otherwise it's unclear, which is what satum is. But comes Rav Ashi, and he says we're going to have two versions of Rav Ashi. Each one's going to go even farther than the first. Then the second one will go farther than the first. Amar Rav Ashi. Hada amar meforashim lo. When you say specified, right? Once you specify, though, you can't do this law anymore. And then there's actually, we'll talk about this in a minute, right? In the Mishnah, what do we have? If it's meforash, then again, what you said was going to the ola will go to olot nidava. What you said was going to go to shlamim will go to shalmei nidava. Remember, voluntary offerings. And what you said for the chatat will have to be left to die. If it's an animal or money, it'll have to be sent to Yamamelach, to the Dead Sea. But here he comes and says, lo tema, don't say mifolash is only de'amar elu l'chatati ve'elu l'olati ve'elu l'shlamai. Like I said, this money for this money for that, this money for that. Ela, afilu amar elu l'chatati ve'olati ve'lu I take a wad of cash and I say, this money is going to my chatat, to my olah, to my shlamim. That's already specified. Even though it wasn't clear which money was going where, that already becomes specified. Meforashim. Now there's a big debate. What would you do then? Because we don't know which is going where. So either you split it a third, a third, a third. Third goes to Yamamelach, a third for a shlamim, and a third for an olah. Both those second ones voluntary offerings. Or some people say the whole thing has to go to Yamamelach. It's also a possibility. Some people say that Amar Rav Ashi lo tema adamar elu l'chatati u'lolati u'l'shlamai. Don't say what we just said. That in order for it to be not satum, you have to say, right, elu l'chatati u'lolati u'l'shlamim. And only if you start either that or get more specific, like this money's going to this money's going to that, right? But don't say only those. Ela afilu amar elu l'chovati. If I say these are for my obligation, that's already harein k'meforashim. That really goes very far. It limits the stumim case, the one that's interesting us so much that we could say all the money goes to nidava, limiting it to a very specific case where all you said was, these are for my korbanot, these are for my sacrifices. Once I mentioned the word obligation, that's already being particular. It's a very interesting interpretation because you're really not being specific at all, but that's already being specific. So two different versions of Rav Ashi, each one goes farther than we thought originally about what is considered specified. Amarav, which by the way, limits what we call satum, just to be clear, right? Then this halakha, harein, the stumim, yiplul nidava, they go to nidavot offerings, is much, much more limited. And according to each, right, the second interpretation of Rashi, it's even more limited. Amarav. So again, first section we did today was to say, is it only a halakha by Nazir, not by anything else? Then we said, no, it's by other things as well, and that was coming to exclude one case. Then Rav Ashi came and defined for us what is satum, what is meforash. Now we go to Rava, who basically says, Hada amar ma'ot stumim yiplul nidava, is again going to be a little more specific about when this applies. We're going to see, certainly in the braita that's about to follow, that the key thing here is the chatat. If the chatat is still with all the money, why this is a good question, I don't have a good answer. If the chatat is still within the money, and it's satum, and you weren't specific at all, again, however you define at all, you weren't specific about it, then it's going to go linidava. But if you had a wad of cash that you said is for the sacrifices, and then you separated some of it, and you said, listen, some of this money I'm going to put for my chatat, my sin offering, then even what's left is kimefurashim. What's the relevance of this? We're going to see in a minute, because we're going to bring a braita to support Rava. We're now on Amud Bet. Tanya kavatei de Rava. Here's a braita to support. If you say elu lachatati, so exactly the same. So these are my. It's a little different because there we had all the money together, and then you separate the chatat. Here you started saying this money is for the chatat. The rest of the money is for the rest of my obligations, which is the ola and the shlamim. Right? And then something happens. You die. I don't know what. So, or your husband undoes your vow. So the money for the chatat goes to the Dead Sea. Hash'al, what about the rest? It's because we don't say it all goes nidava, simply like the last time. No. We split it. Half the money goes to buy your ola offering, half goes to buy a shlamim offering, right? They're, again, voluntary offerings. The braita mentions another halakha, which isn't relevant for our purposes, but it's an interesting halakha, which is there's only me'ila, if you remember, we talked about this for an ola, not for a shlamim. So if you have all the money and you spend, let's say you took all that money that was set aside for the ola and the shlamim, and you forgot that you set it aside, or your kids came and took it to the supermarket and bought all this food, or went shopping to the mall and bought clothing, and all of a sudden you realize she took all my money, right? That was the money that was, and if they spent all of it, then it's me'ila for sure, because they spent some that was shlamim where there was no me'ila, but they did spend all of it, which means they spent also the ola money. But ein mo'alim b'miktzatan. But if you only gave them, if they only took less than half the money, or maybe even half, it's not so clear where we draw the line. They only took part of the money, then they could claim, right, or anyone could claim, in other words, there's no way to convict you of me'ila, whoever used it. There's no way to convict them of me'ila, because you could say maybe what they used was the part that was designated for the shlam. And there's no me'ila. That's a side point. And now the braita is going to continue and say the opposite. Remember, we said the key is the chatat. If the chatat is removed, then it's no longer satum. But if the chatat is still mixed in, if you say, though, this is for my ola offering, and the rest is for, again, the chatat and the shlamim, without specifying. So the ola money, obviously, you bring voluntary ola offerings with it. And again, there's a din of me'ila because it's an ola. And the rest go to nidava. And again, so even though you're going to buy these ola offerings from it, but since part of the money was for a chatat and part was for shlamim, until you actually use the money for that, for the ola, which you're now going to bring, if someone were to accidentally spend that money on something else, if they spent all of it, there would be me'ila, because there's me'ila for the chatat. But there isn't me'ila for the shlamim, and therefore if you only use part of the money, then there wouldn't be a law of me'ila. But before we move on, I want to point out there's an aleph here. That little aleph sends you to the Hagahot HaGra. The Gra had comments in here, and based on the version of the Tosefta, he said there's a mistake here. I'm going back to what I said a minute ago, which is really all that money goes to ola offerings now, because they're nidava, whatever's left. So if that's the case, there should be me'ila in the entire thing, because it's all money designated for an ola. And therefore the Gra says, and based on the version of the Tosefta, he says it's a mistake that it says ein mo'alim b'miktzatan. It should be mo'alim b'miktzatan. There is me'ila even if you use only part of it, because all of it is for ola. So even if you just took part of it, now at this point, it's switched from being a shlamim and a chata to actually ola offerings, voluntary burnt offerings. So therefore, there would be me'ila in the entire thing. Okay, so again, Rava, basically, where we're up to, Rava basically came and said, Ma'ot stumim yipulin nidava, right? That's only if the Demei Chatat are still mixed in. But if you separated out Demei Chatat, then it wouldn't be relevant anymore. This whole unique halakha of the Ma'ot Stumim go for voluntary offerings. Now we're going to have a bunch more exceptions to this halakha, but from a different perspective, a different type of exception. Amarav huna amarav. It's not about how you designated the money or what it was, but amarav huna amarav lo shanu ela ma'ot aval behema harei kimefureshet. This whole law is only when you're talking about money. But let's say you took an animal, and they use specifically an example of an animal that can't be used for a sacrifice for a Nazir, because not right. Each sacrifice has its unique what type of animal you need. Let's say you took a bull. A bull can be used as offerings in the temple, but not part of the Nazir offerings. So if you took a bull and you said, this is for my Nazir offerings, that's as if you're already specified, even though the bull could go to cover the cost of all three of them, and it's not so clear which one is going for which. But the whole unique law that ma'ot, stumim, yeplule nidava, that they go for voluntary offerings, if you didn't specify what the money is going for, is just money, not animals. Now we're going to talk about just money, not blank, fill in the blank. What is excluded? What is included? And what's the logic of all these? So it happens to be the commentaries have huge disputes about this. What exactly is the logic behind it? And that affects how they translate all these upcoming cases that we're going to see. And that's going to basically be our topic for the rest of today. So some of them say, the Rosh basically goes in the Kibun, also Tosfo, Rabbeinu Tam, quotes there, that anything that isn't for immediate sale. Now, if you have an animal and you designate it for a sacrifice, and it can't be used for that sacrifice, you actually can't just sell it and use the money to buy the sacrifice. You have to wait, let it graze until it gets a blemish. Only once it's blemished, you can sell. So this animal is not like money. It has to be like money that can be used right away. You can't use this right away because you have to wait. You can't turn it into money so quickly. So because of that, it leaves this status of this unique halakha that was specifically for unspecified money. Rav Nachman, so that was Rav Huna in the name of Rav. Rav Nachman now comes and says, well, when you quoted Rav as saying the animal is already as if it's specified, in other words, it's out of this law of ma'ot stumim, go to voluntary offerings, lo shanu ela tmima. That's only, and this fits well, this is a good reason why the Rosh has good point here. It's only a tmima, one that doesn't have a blemish. Because once it has a blemish, you can immediately sell it. So therefore, it can go right. It basically, it's as if it's money, because all you're going to do is sell it, and you can even barter it and get a new animal for it that will go straight to your sacrifice. So that already is like the money, because money is something you can use, right? Cash you can use immediately for anything you want. So this animal becomes like that if it's already blemished. Aval, but he adds, Rav Nachman adds, aval naskalo. But if you have bars of silver, and now here they're coming to a bunch of different commentaries. What's with bars of silver? What makes bars of silver unique? He says bars of silver are not the same, though. They're not like animals with blemishes, okay? And they're not like money. Why not? Some people say because they're used, the Rosh suggests he suggests two reasons. He says, number one is people actually purchase directly with them. Not clear why that would make a difference. Because in other words, there's no money ever. The animal, we assume you sell for money and then you buy with money. Because these are used as money, but they're not money, so they don't really count. It's a little weird. You would think all the more so if you use it as money, it would make more sense that it would actually be just like money. Some people say also because you don't sell them so quickly, because it's not as sellable in the market. It's not like cash that you can just take the cash and go buy something. So, like I said, a little bit lack of clarity. Also, we're going to have a debate about it, and that's going to also cause lack of clarity. The Mefaresh, the one who appears as Rashi, says here we're talking about if you had 3 bars of silver, and then it's like Mefarash because it's clear that you're going to use one for one for the other, one for the third. In other words, your 3 sacrifices are already kind of designated because each bar of silver is somewhat designated for a different one. It's like splitting up your money. And then it's not like Satum. That actually has a strong proof. The problem is the disagreement, which is in a minute. Why he disagrees is unclear. He draws the line different. He says silver, no, that's still considered like money. And the Rosh says, very logically, which is what we were troubled with before, because according to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, who's disagreeing with Rav Nachman, the simple Rav Nachman, is he says because you could actually sell them. What do you mean? Right? You could sell silver, and you could even buy things with silver since you purchase things with it. All the more so, it's just like money, and therefore it would be considered satum. But sval shel korot lo. But if you have piles of beams that you set aside for building purposes, and you want to use that now for your sacrifices, that no. And that he claims again. So again, is it because there's 3 piles and then it's separated? But then the Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, it doesn't make so much sense according to the Mefarish, because why would 3 blocks of silver be different than 3 piles of beams? Not so clear. The Rosh again goes l'shitato. He says these are things that you wait till you get someone who really needs them, and then you're going to sell them for a high price. So you don't sell them so quickly. So again, they're not fluid like money. So now this is a whole. So what we had was starting with Rav Huna in the name of Rav, who says just money, but behema not, right? Not animals. Then we had, depends which kind of animal. Mima would be not, but if it was already blemished, then it would be more like money. Then we said not silver, or maybe yes silver, right? And then we said not beams, piles of beams that you use for building. Now comes Rav Shimi bar Ashi, and he asks a question on all these opinions. I'm really Rav Shimi bar Ashi, the Rav Papa. His questions to Rav Papa, he says the following. Get this. My time the Rabbanit Damri, ma'ov v'lo be'ema, v'lo naska, ma'ov v'lo svara. Why are all these rabbis saying money but not animals, money but not silver, money but not beams, piles of beams? Elameata, according to all of them, what would you say? Ma'ot v'lo afot, right? You'd say money but not birds. If birds are unspecified, we don't deal with them as if they're unspecified. We put them in the category of all these other things that we said are not part of this law, and they're considered right? They're considered specified already. But if you want to say birds are already specified, then this next source makes no sense. Elahad Amar Rav Chisda, what Rav Chisda said, that ein hakinim mitparshot ela iba lekichat baalim iba asiyat kohen amai ha'ma'ot gemirim. If you're going to say that they're specified immediately, okay, because that's the whole thing. Only ma'ot remain unspecified and have these unique halachot for being unspecified. But anything else would be considered specified, or right? That's what he said. Rav said in those words, "Behema harei kemifureshet." It's as if you specified already, which was for which. But Rav Chisda says, when you set aside, let's say I give birth, and I'm supposed to give a pair of birds if I'm not wealthy. So I go to the store, I buy a pair of birds, or my husband goes, either one. When does it get designated? Which one's going for the chatat? Which one's going for the olah? So Rav Chisda gives basically only 2 possibilities. Either at the moment I purchase it, I say this one's for a chatat, I'm buying this for the chatat, this for the olah. If I don't specify it at that point, and this is the important part, it won't be specified till the Kohen does Iba Asiyat Kohen. When the Kohen puts together the sacrifice, that's the moment he's going to designate which is for which. And until then, it remains what we call satum. But what did we just learn? Amai, why? Ha-ma'ot gemilana. Only ma'ot was the tradition that they're stumim until you designate them. Other things are not considered that way. And therefore, we're left with the question. I'll just put it out there that this question is a bit of a lot. It's not so clear, and there's a lot of commentaries have different ways of reading the sugya to understand exactly what the question is. Anyway, we'll get to the answer tomorrow, and then we'll explain better. But leaving here on a simple reading of this sugya, which again, like I like to always point this out because each answer has a weakness to it. But basically, he says this sugya seems to say that birds are specified only either at the beginning or later on when the Kohen does it. And until then, they remain unspecified. And what we were saying before, Rav was saying, started this whole thing, Rabbi saying in his name, that only ma'ot remain unspecified, but other things are already specified once you designate, once you buy them or right, you have them, it's already as if they're specified. So we'll leave it with that, and we'll pick up from here on Sunday morning. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom, Shavuot Tov.